Jason had always dreamed of living on another planet. As a human who'd been selected for the great adventure of moving to an alien world, he didn't know what to expect. The alien city he'd moved to was nothing like Earth. The sky was a soft purple, and the buildings glowed with an eerie light, casting strange shadows on the streets. Every corner held something new, something alien, and it made Jason feel like an explorer in a world he had never known. When he first saw his new apartment, it was small but cozy, with a view of the alien city stretching out before him. He was excited to finally settle in, but the truth was he felt a little nervous too. He had no idea what to expect from the alien residents. Some of them looked like humans, but others were so different, with strange eyes, skin colors, and features he could barely comprehend. Ilara, his neighbor, was one of those strange residents. She looked human, but there was something about her that made Jason feel uneasy. She had long, dark hair that shimmered like liquid, and her eyes were an unusual shade of gold that seemed to glimmer whenever she looked at him. When Jason first moved in, she gave him a warm, welcoming smile, but it was more than that. There was something in the way she looked at him that made Jason feel like she could see right through him. The first time they met was when Jason had just moved in and was carrying a box up to his apartment. Ilara happened to be walking down the hall, and she stopped to introduce herself. Her voice was soft, but there was a strength in it that Jason couldn't ignore. "Hello, I'm Ilara," she said, her gaze locked on him with an intensity that made him feel both welcomed and strangely exposed. Jason smiled back, adjusting the box in his arms. "Hi, I'm Jason. Just moved in. Nice to meet you." They exchanged a few polite words, but it was clear that Ilara's gaze lingered a little longer than usual. As Jason turned to enter his apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about her was different from everyone else. It was as if she was looking right through him, understanding things he had never spoken aloud. That night, as Jason sat on his couch and unpacked, he tried to push the thoughts of his strange neighbor out of his mind. But as he tried to relax, something unexpected happened. As he leaned back, he caught himself thinking about Ilara, about how beautiful and mysterious she was. He felt a sudden warmth in his chest and a stir of something deeper, something he wasn't quite sure how to define. He shook his head, trying to focus on something else. He didn't know why he was thinking like this, especially about someone he barely knew. Little did he know, Ilara could hear his every thought. Ilara, too, had been feeling the pull of something strange ever since meeting Jason. She had a gift she had never shared with anyone. She could hear the thoughts of others, their emotions, their desires, their deepest fears. It was both a blessing and a curse. It had been something she had to learn to control. Most of the time, she kept her distance from others, afraid of what she might hear, afraid of the thoughts that would flood her mind. But when Jason had looked at her in the hallway that day, she had felt something shift. She had felt a connection, an energy between them. His thoughts were louder than anyone else's she had ever heard, and it wasn't just his surface thoughts. It was deeper, more intense. She could hear his curiosity, his admiration, and, most of all, his desire. Ilara knew that she should have turned away, should have left him alone. But she couldn't. The thoughts were too strong. His thoughts about her, his desire for her, were impossible to ignore. It was like a song she couldn't stop listening to, a melody that played in her mind without stopping. For the next few days, Ilara found herself watching Jason from afar. She kept her distance, not wanting to reveal the truth about herself. But the more she heard, the more she felt drawn to him. His thoughts were full of longing, and the emotions that spilled over were something she couldn't deny. Every time she passed by his apartment or caught a glimpse of him in the hallway, his thoughts echoed in her mind, growing louder. Jason, on the other hand, had no idea what was going on. He simply couldn't get Ilara out of his head. Her beauty, her mystery, her quiet confidence. Everything about her intrigued him. He began to wonder what it would be like to get to know her better, but there was something about her that kept him at a distance. It was like she was hiding something. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the thought of her filled his mind more than he cared to admit, and so the two of them continued on their separate paths, each unaware of the powerful connection forming between them. But as the days passed, it became clear that the connection between them was growing stronger, and the strange pull between them was something neither could ignore. Alara couldn't stop thinking about Jason, his thoughts, the ones she had caught glimpses of during their brief meeting, played in her mind over and over again. It wasn't just his surface thoughts. No, his deeper emotions, his desires, were louder than anything she'd ever heard before. His thoughts were like whispers in a quiet room, and yet they felt like a constant hum, always present. She knew she should have ignored them. She was used to pushing away the thoughts of others, keeping her mind clear. But Jason's thoughts were different. They weren't just thoughts. They were like an invitation, an energy that pulled her closer even though she knew she should stay away. At first, Alara thought she could control it. She thought she could just ignore the thoughts and go about her day like she always did. But when she passed by his apartment again, something in her changed. She could hear him thinking about her, again. The same feelings, the same longing. This time, though, they seemed louder, clearer. She heard his thoughts in a way she hadn't before. Jason was sitting on his couch, looking out the window as he thought about his day. As he glanced around, his thoughts drifted toward Alara. He imagined what it would be like to talk to her, to get to know her better. But it wasn't just curiosity. There was something deeper in his thoughts, something that spoke of a longing he couldn't ignore. He imagined the sound of her voice, the way she looked when she smiled, and how easy it would be to be around her. He could hear her laughter in his mind, soft and warm, and it made him feel comforted, drawn toward her. Alara's heart beat faster as she heard his thoughts. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she couldn't deny the effect they had on her. His thoughts weren't just about physical attraction, they were about connection, about understanding, and that made her feel something she hadn't expected. She felt his loneliness, his desire for companionship, and it mirrored her own. She had been so isolated in her life, keeping her distance from others because of her ability to hear their every thought. But Jason was different. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to focus. She needed to calm her mind, but it wasn't working. His thoughts had taken over, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake them off. The more she tried to ignore him, the stronger the pull became. She could hear him in the silence of her own thoughts, his voice clear and full of emotion. It was like he was speaking directly to her, even though he didn't know it. For the first time in a long while, Alara felt out of control. She had always prided herself on being able to block out the noise of other people's thoughts, but Jason's thoughts, they were impossible to ignore. They were so real, so full of emotion, that it was as if he was standing right there beside her. The next day, Alara found herself thinking about Jason even more. His presence lingered in her mind like a song she couldn't forget. She found herself passing by his apartment again, drawn to the soft glow of his windows. It was late, and she didn't expect to see him, but something told her to stop and listen. Just as she stood outside his door, she heard his thoughts once again. This time, though, they were different. This time, they were more intense. Jason was thinking about her. He was wondering if she could feel the same way about him. He didn't understand why, but he found himself thinking about her all the time. He couldn't explain it, but it felt like there was a connection between them that he couldn't ignore. Alara's heart skipped a beat as she heard his thoughts. She couldn't deny it anymore. There was something between them, something powerful. She could feel it in her chest, like a spark that had started small but was quickly growing. For a moment, she stood there, unable to move. She was caught in the pull of his thoughts, unable to tear herself away. She wasn't sure what to do. Should she knock on his door? Should she try to speak to him? Or would it be better to walk away, to ignore the strange connection that was pulling her toward him? But before she could make up her mind, Jason's thoughts shifted again. He wasn't just thinking about her anymore. This time, he was wondering what it would be like if they were to meet, if they were to talk more, to get to know each other better. He imagined what it would be like to hear her laugh, to spend time with her, and most of all, he imagined what it would be like to kiss her. The thought stopped Alara in her tracks. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard people's desires before, but Jason's were different. They weren't just surface thoughts. They were filled with longing, with a deep sense of wanting something more. And it was so raw, so real, that Alara couldn't help but feel herself drawn into it. Her mind raced as she tried to regain control, but it was no use. Jason's thoughts were too loud, too clear, and she couldn't block them out. She took a deep breath and stepped away from his door, knowing that things were changing between them, whether she was ready for it or not. As Alara walked back to her apartment, she realized that she couldn't ignore Jason any longer. The connection between them was too strong, too real. She had to face it and face him, even if she didn't fully understand what was happening. Alara couldn't stop thinking about Jason. Each day, the thoughts she heard from him were becoming harder and harder to ignore. It was as if his presence was always in her mind, even when they weren't around each other. She tried to stay focused on her daily routine, but no matter how hard she tried, Jason's thoughts seemed to find their way into her mind. She knew it was risky to allow herself to become so consumed by him, but there was something about him, something real and raw, that made her want to hear more. Every thought of his pulled her in, and despite herself, she found herself drawn to him, like a magnet. It had been a few days since she had stood outside his door, wondering whether or not she should speak to him. But her hesitation had only increased her curiosity. The longing she heard in his thoughts seemed genuine, and she began to wonder if perhaps he felt the same strange connection that she did. One afternoon, as she walked down the hallway toward her apartment, she saw him. Jason was just a few steps away, carrying a stack of books. His back was to her, and for a moment she almost turned around to avoid him. But something stopped her. She didn't know why, but she decided to keep walking. Jason turned around, and when he saw her, a slight smile spread across his face. "Oh, hey, Alara," he said, his voice friendly but a little unsure. "Hi, Jason," Alara replied, trying to keep her cool despite the rush of emotions she felt. She had been hearing his thoughts for days now, but standing in front of him, actually talking to him, was a different experience altogether. His presence was even more overwhelming than his thoughts. Jason took a step toward her, his expression a mixture of curiosity and awkwardness. I was just heading out to the library," he said. "I know we haven't really talked much, but I was wondering if maybe you'd want to join me. I mean, if you're not busy." Alara blinked, surprised by his offer. She hadn't expected him to reach out like this, but the thought of spending time with him sent a strange flutter through her chest. It was a simple invitation, but to Alara, it felt like something more. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should accept. But then, without fully thinking, she smiled. "I'd like that," she said. "I'm not busy." Jason's face lit up at her response. "Great. It's just around the corner," he said. "Let's go." The two of them walked together down the hallway, and as they stepped outside into the bright alien daylight, Alara couldn't help but feel a nervous excitement bubbling inside her. She had never allowed herself to get close to anyone, And now, here she was, walking beside Jason, someone whose thoughts she had been hearing for days. As they walked to the library, they exchanged small talk. Jason asked about Alara's work, and Alara asked about his life before he moved to the alien planet. Though neither of them fully understood each other's worlds, the conversation flowed easily. Alara was amazed at how natural it felt to talk to him. She had always been careful about who she let into her life, but with Jason, it felt different. His presence didn't feel like a threat. It felt safe, comforting even. When they reached the library, Jason held the door open for her, and Alara walked inside, still feeling the warmth of his smile from earlier. The library was vast and quiet, with rows of books stretching as far as the eye could see. Alara had always enjoyed reading, but today she found herself more focused on Jason than the books. As they wandered through the aisles, Jason stopped in front of a shelf of alien history books. "I'm really into ancient alien cultures," he said, his voice excited. "I think it's fascinating how different their customs were. There's so much to learn from them." Alara nodded, her thoughts drifting. She could feel the interest in his voice, but she also noticed something else. His thoughts were clearer now that they were in the same space. She could hear how much he wanted to impress her, to show her that he was knowledgeable and interesting. It made her smile to herself, though she kept it hidden. "What about you?" Jason asked, turning toward her. "What interests you?" Alara thought for a moment, trying to decide how to answer. "I'm more interested in the connections between people," she said softly. "How emotions can shape relationships. It's not something you can always see, but it's there." Jason seemed intrigued by her answer. "That's an interesting way to look at things," he said, his voice warm. "I think you're right. Sometimes the most important things are the ones we don't see right away." They continued to browse the shelves, but the air between them had changed. The small talk had faded, and now there was a deeper connection. They didn't need to speak as much to understand each other. The tension was palpable, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just a new feeling, something neither of them had experienced before. As they walked to a quieter part of the library, Jason turned to Alara, his expression more serious now. "I've been meaning to ask," he said. "I don't really know much about your kind, Alara. What's it like living on a planet full of, well, humans and aliens like me?" Alara looked at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's different, but it's also interesting. We're all learning to coexist. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Jason nodded slowly, as if absorbing her words. "Yeah, I get that. It's a lot to take in, but I think we'll figure it out," Alara agreed. But as they stood there in the quiet library, she couldn't help but wonder where this connection between them was leading. There was so much she didn't understand. But one thing was certain. She couldn't deny that Jason was beginning to mean more to her than she had expected. As the days passed, the connection between Alara and Jason deepened, though neither of them fully understood why. They continued meeting in the library, spending hours talking about everything and nothing. Jason found himself looking forward to their conversations more than he had expected. Ilara's calm nature and insightful thoughts fascinated him, and he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to know her better outside the walls of the library. Alara, on the other hand, was struggling to keep her emotions in check. She had always been good at maintaining control, but Jason's presence and his thoughts were making that harder every day. His curiosity about her, the way he seemed to genuinely care about her opinions, was something she had never experienced before. The more she heard his thoughts, the stronger her own feelings for him became. But there was a problem. Ilara's gift, the ability to hear others' thoughts, was both a blessing and a curse. It had allowed her to learn things about Jason that no one else could know. She could hear his desires, his longing for her, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. She could feel his attraction, his admiration, and his curiosity. His thoughts about her were so clear, so strong, that she felt as if she were hearing him speak directly to her. It was becoming harder to separate his thoughts from her own. She couldn't help but wonder if he could hear her thoughts as well. Would he sense her feelings for him, just as she had sensed his? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't deny the pull between them. It was getting stronger every day. One afternoon, as Ilara walked to the library, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. She had just finished a long day at work and was exhausted, but her mind was restless. As she passed by Jason's apartment, she couldn't help but glance at his door. The thoughts she had been hearing from him all week came rushing back. He was thinking about her again. She could feel it. Ilara paused for a moment, trying to calm herself. She was always careful about where she let her emotions go, but with Jason, it felt like she had no control. His thoughts had a way of slipping into her mind when she least expected it. Today, his thoughts were filled with confusion. He wondered if he should make a move, if it was too soon, if it was too risky. Ilara felt her heart race as she realized what he was contemplating. But then, just as quickly, Jason's thoughts shifted. He wondered if she could feel what he was feeling. Could she sense the attraction, the desire that was growing between them? Was it too much for her to handle? Was it too much for him? He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. Ilara's pulse quickened as she heard these thoughts. She couldn't help but smile to herself. Jason's honesty, his vulnerability in his thoughts made her feel closer to him than ever before. But she also knew that if she wasn't careful, everything could spiral out of control. The connection between them was intense, and she wasn't sure if they were both ready for what would come next. When she arrived at the library, she found Jason already there, waiting for her. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and Ilara couldn't help but feel a flutter in her chest. She smiled, trying to push aside the thoughts that had been swirling in her mind. "Hey," Jason said, his voice warm. "I was just about to pick out a book on alien history. Want to join me?" Ilara nodded, her heart still racing. "Sure," she said, trying to soothe and casual. They walked together down the aisles, their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet library. The tension between them was palpable, but neither of them said anything about it. It felt as if they were both waiting for something to happen, but neither was willing to make the first move. Jason picked out a book, but his attention wasn't on the pages. His thoughts were on Ilara, and he couldn't stop wondering if she felt the same way. He had been so careful not to let his feelings show, but now he was beginning to wonder if he had been fooling himself. Was he just hearing things in his own mind, or was there really something between them? Ilara could hear every thought, every doubt, every hope that crossed his mind. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that she felt the same way. But something held her back. She didn't know if she was ready to take that step. She had always kept her emotions at a distance, afraid of what might happen if she let them out. But with Jason, it felt different. It felt like something she couldn't ignore, something she didn't want to ignore. After a long silence, Jason finally spoke. "Ilara," he said, his voice hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about this connection we have. I don't know what it is, but it feels real. I don't want to rush anything, but I don't want to ignore it either." Ilara felt a wave of warmth wash over her. She had heard his thoughts, of course, but hearing him speak them aloud made everything feel more real. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "I feel the same way," she said softly, "but I don't know what this is either. I've never felt anything like this before." Jason looked at her, his expression serious. "Then let's figure it out together," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Ilara smiled, her heart lifting. The tension that had been building between them seemed to fade, replaced by something new, something hopeful. They didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, Ilara felt like maybe, just maybe, they didn't need to. The days that followed their conversation were filled with a strange mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Ilara and Jason continued, meeting at the library, spending hours discussing everything from history to alien cultures, and occasionally the subtle connection they were both starting to feel. Every time they spoke, the bond between them grew stronger, but there was also an unspoken tension that neither of them dared to address directly. Ilara tried to focus on her work, but Jason's thoughts were never far from her mind. She could hear him when they were apart, and his curiosity, his admiration for her, seemed to grow with each passing day. She could feel the warmth in his thoughts, the way he thought about her when she wasn't around. Sometimes they were just fleeting moments of thought, but other times they were vivid and filled with a deep longing. She had never felt anything like this before. No one had ever made her feel so seen, so understood, and so vulnerable. Jason wasn't just hearing her thoughts. He was respecting them. He wasn't pushing her to reveal more than she was comfortable with. And that made her feel like she could trust him. But the trust wasn't enough to erase the fear that lingered in her mind. She had always kept her emotions guarded, afraid of what might happen if she let someone in. And though she could hear his feelings for her, she didn't know if she was ready to take the next step. She feared that the connection between them might be too intense, too overwhelming. One evening, as Ilara sat on her balcony, watching the purple sky shift from sunset to twilight, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Her mind was filled with thoughts of Jason, his kindness, his laughter, the way he made her feel both safe and exposed at the same time. The pull between them was undeniable, but it was also confusing. Ilara had always known her boundaries, had always kept a safe distance from others. But with Jason, everything felt different. Just then, she felt a soft vibration in the air. Jason's thoughts. She smiled to herself, knowing that he was probably thinking about her again. It had become a daily occurrence, and the more she heard from him, the more she found herself wondering if they could truly explore whatever it was that was building between them. His thoughts were clear, though tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know what this is, but I can't ignore it," Jason's voice echoed in her mind. "I don't know if you feel the same way, but I need to know if I'm the only one thinking about this." Ilara felt her heart flutter. She could hear the honesty in his thoughts, the same longing she had felt for him. It made her pause, unsure of what to do next. She had heard his thoughts before, but hearing him say it aloud in her mind felt different. She realized that Jason wasn't just wondering about her feelings. He was waiting for her to confirm what they both already knew. Her thoughts mirrored his. "I don't know if I'm ready," she thought, the words rising up inside her. "But I can't stop thinking about you either." For a long moment there was silence between them. Ilara knew that this wasn't just a passing feeling. It was real, and it was growing stronger every day. She had to make a choice. Later that evening, as the last of the daylight faded from the sky, Ilara decided to take a step she hadn't been sure she could. She stood up from her balcony and walked out of her apartment, her heart beating faster with every step she took toward Jason's. She wasn't sure what would happen when they finally talked about everything they were feeling, but she knew she couldn't hide from it any longer. When she arrived at his door, she hesitated. For a brief moment, she thought about turning back. What if this changed everything between them? What if she wasn't ready for the consequences of what she was about to do? But then she remembered the way Jason had made her feel, heard, understood, and cared for, and she knew that this moment wasn't something she could ignore. She knocked lightly on his door. A few moments later, Jason opened it, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Ilara," he said softly, his voice full of warmth. "I didn't expect you. Is everything okay?" Ilara smiled, her heart racing. "I needed to talk to you." Jason stepped aside, his expression curious but welcoming. Of course. Come in. They sat down together, the silence between them charged with unspoken words. Jason looked at her, his eyes full of questions. "You've been on my mind a lot," he said. "I don't know what this is between us, but I can't stop thinking about you, Alara. And I need to know. Do you feel the same way?" Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She could hear his thoughts even now, filled with both hope and fear. She couldn't deny it any longer. She had heard his feelings for days, and now, here he was, asking for her. Honesty. She took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. "I feel the same way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been hearing your thoughts, Jason. I've been feeling the same thing, but I wasn't sure if I should act on it. I didn't know if I was ready." Jason reached out, gently taking her hand. "I don't know what will happen, Alara," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "But I know I don't want to ignore this. I don't want to regret not trying." Ilara's heart swelled with emotion, and for the first time she allowed herself to fully let go of the fear that had been holding her back. She squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch spread through her. "I don't know what will happen either," she said softly. "But I'm willing to find out." And for the first time in a long while, Ilara felt the weight of her fears lift. She didn't have all the answers, but with Jason by her side, she was ready to see where this connection would take them. Ilara and Jason's connection had shifted. The tension that had been lingering between them for days now felt different, more comfortable, more natural. After their conversation, everything seemed clearer, though neither of them knew exactly where this new path would lead. But what they did know was that they couldn't ignore the bond between them any longer. It was undeniable. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of shared moments, quiet conversations in the library, walks through the alien city, and more time spent together than they had ever imagined. Every second seemed to deepen their understanding of each other, their thoughts blending, their feelings growing. Ilara found herself more and more drawn to Jason, the pull between them too strong to resist. She could hear his thoughts more clearly than ever before. But it wasn't just his thoughts anymore. It was his emotions, his hopes, his dreams, and the longing he felt whenever they were apart. Jason, on the other hand, was beginning to understand the extent of his feelings for Ilara. He had never imagined that someone so different, so mysterious, could feel so close to him. He wasn't used to feeling this way, especially not with someone who seemed to understand him so completely. It was like they had always known each other, even though they had only met a few weeks ago. One evening, after a long day of talking about everything and nothing, Jason invited Ilara to dinner. He had prepared a meal for them both in his apartment. Nothing fancy, just a simple dish that he had learned to make during his time on the planet. Ilara had always appreciated the little things, and Jason's gesture felt like something special. It was simple, yet it felt like a moment they both needed. When Ilara arrived, she was greeted by the warmth of Jason's smile and the soft glow of the lights in his apartment. The table was set with care, and there was an air of comfort in the room, as if they were two old friends who had finally found each other after a long time apart. "This looks amazing," Ilara said, sitting down at the table. "I didn't expect you to cook." Jason laughed softly. "I may not be the best cook, but I try. I figured it'd be nice to do something a little different. Besides, it's always better when you cook with someone, right?" Ilara smiled, her heart warming at his words. They began to eat, the conversation flowing easily between them. They talked about their favorite foods, about the things they missed most from their home worlds, and about the small, quiet moments that they both cherished. Ilara couldn't help but notice how Jason's thoughts had shifted. They weren't filled with uncertainty anymore. Now they were full of contentment, of peace, of something deeper than she had expected. As the evening wore on, the conversation naturally turned to their connection. Neither of them had been brave enough to bring it up directly, but now it felt like the right time. Jason put down his fork, his eyes meeting hers. "Ilara," he began softly, "I've been thinking about us. I don't know what this is or where it's going, but I do know one thing. I don't want to let it go. I can't stop thinking about you." Ilara's heart skipped a beat as she looked into his eyes. She had heard his thoughts before, felt the way he had been thinking about her, but hearing him say it aloud made everything feel so real. It was the moment she had been waiting for. "I feel the same way," Ilara replied, her voice quiet, but full of sincerity. "I don't know what this is either, but it's real, and it's something I can't ignore. I've never felt anything like this before." Jason smiled, the warmth of his expression filling the room. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. The touch was gentle, but the connection between them felt stronger than ever. For a moment, neither of them said anything. There was no need for words. They both understood each other completely, without the need for explanations. Their thoughts were intertwined, their feelings clear. Ilara could hear Jason's thoughts now more than ever, his feelings for her, his hopes for what might come next. She could feel the excitement and the uncertainty, but most of all, she could feel the strength of his emotions. It was something she had never experienced before, and it both frightened and excited her. Without thinking, Ilara leaned forward and kissed Jason. It was soft at first, just a gentle brush of lips, but as the seconds passed, the kiss deepened, filled with the unspoken emotions that had been building between them. Jason's thoughts were louder now, filled with warmth and affection, and Ilara felt every single one of them as they pulled each other closer. The kiss was like a spark, a promise of something new, something neither of them had expected, but both had secretly hoped for. As they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested against each other, both of them breathing softly, still lost in the moment. "I don't know what this is going to mean for us," Jason whispered, "but I do know that I want to find out. With you." Ilara smiled, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "I want that too," she whispered back. For the first time, Ilara felt like she could let go of the fears that had held her back. She didn't need to have all the answers, and neither did Jason. What mattered was that they had found each other, and in that moment, that was enough. As they sat together, wrapped in the warmth of each other's presence, the night stretched on, filled with the quiet promise of something more. Whatever the future held, Ilara knew that with Jason, she would face it head-on, no longer afraid of what might come next. The days after their kiss were filled with new emotions for both Ilara and Jason. The connection between them, once an unspoken bond, had become a powerful force that neither could ignore. They spent more time together, sharing everything from their favorite memories to their hopes for the future. Yet, even as they grew closer, both of them knew that something was bound to change. The growing attraction, the deepening feelings, they couldn't keep it to themselves forever. Ilara had always been cautious. Her ability to hear others' thoughts had made her protective of herself, keeping her distance from everyone for as long as she could remember. She had learned to guard her emotions, to keep them hidden away, because she knew how easily they could be exposed. But with Jason, everything felt different. Every time they were together, she could hear his thoughts more clearly, and for the first time in her life, she found herself wanting to share her own feelings. It was late one evening, when Ilara sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. Jason's thoughts still echoed in her mind, and she couldn't help but smile at the memory of their kiss. He had been so gentle with her, so patient, but she knew that neither of them could deny the intensity of what was between them. The bond was undeniable, and it was growing stronger with every passing day. But with that growing connection came the reality that neither of them had truly faced the consequences. Ilara's world and Jason's were both built on unspoken rules, unacknowledged boundaries. They both knew what was at stake, the danger of their emotions being discovered. Jason, a human, and Ilara, an alien with abilities that no one could fully understand. What would happen if anyone found out about their growing relationship? Ilara stood up from the couch, pacing slowly across the room. She was torn. She had always kept her feelings guarded, afraid of what might happen if they were exposed. The thoughts she heard from others were often too much to bear, too overwhelming. But Jason was different. His feelings for her were clear, and though he hadn't said it aloud, she knew he cared about her more than he had ever cared about anyone. She couldn't help but wonder if Jason felt the same fear she did. Did he worry about what might happen if anyone discovered their connection? Did he understand the risks they were taking, the dangers of letting their feelings grow in a world that didn't fully understand them? Just as she was lost in her thoughts, she heard a soft knock on her door. Startled, Ilara quickly walked over and opened it, finding Jason standing on the other side. His eyes were filled with concern, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something deeper. "Ilara," he began, his voice quiet but urgent. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us." Ilara felt her heart race at the sight of him. She had known this moment was coming. She had known that sooner or later they would need to talk about what was happening between them. But the weight of it all still felt heavy, like a burden neither of them had fully understood. "I've been thinking about it too," Ilara replied, her voice soft. "We need to talk about this, about what's really happening." Jason stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I don't want to hide this anymore," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I know we can't keep pretending that everything's normal. I don't want to be afraid of what we feel." Ilara nodded, understanding the truth of his words. She had spent so much time hiding her emotions, pushing them aside, that she hadn't truly considered what it meant to be open. With Jason, she knew she didn't have to hide. But at the same time, she knew the risks were high. The consequences of their bond could be more dangerous than either of them realized. "I don't want to hide either," Ilara admitted, her voice filled with vulnerability. "But there's so much we don't know. If anyone finds out about us, about what we're feeling, it could cause problems. It could cause danger for both of us." Jason sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I've thought about that too. I know there are risks, and I know things could get complicated, but I don't care about the rules, Ilara. I care about you." Ilara's heart swelled with emotion at his words. She had never allowed herself to care about anyone the way she cared about him, and now she was afraid of losing that. The fear of the unknown, of what might happen if their connection was discovered, was real. But at that moment, looking into Jason's eyes, Ilara knew that there was no going back. "I care about you too, Jason," she whispered. "But we have to be careful. We can't just ignore the reality of our situation. We have to think about what happens next." Jason stepped closer to her, taking her hands in his. "We'll figure it out together," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to let fear control us." Ilara's heart skipped a beat at the sincerity in his voice. She could hear his thoughts clearly now. There was no hesitation in them, no fear, just love. It was all so overwhelming. And yet, in that moment, it felt like everything had fallen into place. They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other's gaze. The weight of the situation was still there, heavy on their shoulders. But there was something else too, something more powerful than fear. It was a promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. As the night stretched on, Ilara realized that the consequences of their feelings were still unknown. But one thing was certain: She wasn't ready to let go of Jason. Whatever happened, they would find a way to make it work. Together.